I have a question I want you to think about. How does a young man in his teens find himself homeless? How does a young man in his teens find himself homeless? Let me read you a text that I got the other day. This would have been last Saturday. Okay, so I'm currently homeless. I need a place to stay until this coming Wednesday, and I'm really hoping you can help me out. I've been living with a friend for the past week, and I've worked enough for a decent paycheck, but he's mentally abusive, and he tries to control my life, so I can't stay with him until Wednesday. He describes how he's got this friend in Arkansas who he's about to go move out of state to live with to work up to save for college, and then he finishes his text by saying, I'll do anything you need in order for me to stay. I truly have nowhere else to go, and I'm hoping you can help me out. How does a young man in his teens, fresh out of high school, end up homeless? How does a family dynamic end up so toxic that can't even be a place that he goes? Choices, decisions over time. Some people have put it this way: you are a product of your decisions and the things you've chosen to do through life. And everyone in this room, you know what it is to make decisions, have heavy decisions before you of, man, should I take this career change? Should I pursue this route? Should I invest into this person? Should I cut that relationship off? Should I start a new relationship? Should I get my kids involved in this thing? Or should I sell this or hold on to this? You guys know what it is to have to make decisions through life. And the reality comes to play that every one of us in this room needs a guide or a mentor. Every one of us in this room needs a guide or needs a mentor. And here we find ourselves at the book of Proverbs. And for context, as we jump into Proverbs 8, Proverbs 1 to 9 is a collection of speeches. And what Tim Mackey pointed out, they have an animation studio called the Bible Project, which I highly recommend. But he ends up pointing out how through these 9 speeches, there's 4 symbolic characters calling out to you. And who's the you? Well, it's referenced as a my son, or a child, or a youth. And the point is that just picture a youth on her way or his way into life's journey and fresh, ready to start. And that person, that youth, needs a mentor, needs a voice speaking in. And so what you're going to see in these 4 symbolic characters is you have the 2 on the left, and one is portrayed as this fatherly king trying to give his son advice. And he's partnering with Lady Wisdom, who's also a personification of God's wisdom, calling out to the young man as well. So you have them saying, hey, follow our voice, we'll be your guide and mentor, and we lead to life. But then you also have this contrasting couple. One of them is the wicked man. That's the one who's like, hey, come, let us wait for blood. And then you also heard last week Zach's teaching on Proverbs 7. That was Lady Folly's speech. This smooth talk, this attractive talk, and she's promising life, and everything looks good, but it ends up leading to death. And so do you see these 4 symbolic characters through these 9 chapters? Today we're covering Lady Wisdom's main call and speech to you in Proverbs 8. So that's what we're going to break down. It happens in 4 movements. You'll see up on the screen the framework that we're going to walk through. And it starts with an introduction, which is portrayed in the voice of that fatherly king, readying you to listen to Lady Wisdom. So you guys can read with me verses 1 to 3. You'll see it on the screen if you don't have your Bible with you. So it says, the fatherly king says, does not wisdom call, and does not understanding raise her voice? On the heights beside the way, at the crossroads she takes her stand. Besides the gates in front of the town, at the entrance of the portals, she cries aloud. And so what's this first introduction doing? If you take a look at some specific words, you'll kind of know, if I'm trying to listen to wisdom's voice, her call, where am I going to hear her? So that's what the Father is doing. And notice he mentions things like crossroads, gates, entrances to cities. Just picture what crossroads are. They're places where paths come together or paths separate, and you end up having to make a decision on which path you go. And then now picture entering into a city at the gates. Specifically, in Eastern cities, especially in this ancient Near Eastern context, that's the place where there would be a hub of marketplace activity. A bunch of decisions about buying and selling. And also, it's the place where leaders would meet. You see that in the book of Ruth. So what's the point here? The fatherly a king is saying, look, hear wisdom's cry. Where is she going to cry? Where you need to make decisions. And here comes wisdom's speech, okay? So watch how she does this. Movement, part number 1. Here we go. Hear, for I will speak noble things, and from my lips will come what is right. For my mouth will utter truth. Wickedness is an abomination to my lips. All the words of my mouth are righteous, and there is nothing twisted or crooked in them. If there's a lot of voices calling out to you to say, come my way, how do you recognize wisdom's voice? What's the content of her speech? Goodness, truth, righteousness, uprightness. Oh, okay. Now I can help recognize her voice. Or you could just recognize what her voice doesn't sound like. Twisting of truth, crookedness, deception. She ends up saying, look, none of that in verse 8. There is nothing twisted or crooked in my speech. Nothing. So that's how you can recognize the voice, her voice amidst many. But also what she's going to do is give you, like a handout, a choice to make. She's not forcing your hand to take her. She's offering an invitation. Look what this says, next text, Zach. Take my instruction, in verse 10, instead of silver. Take it. Knowledge rather than choice gold. For wisdom is better than jewels, and all that you may desire cannot compare with it. Simply put, she's offering you to take her instead of taking all you could desire. You see that? She's offering you, take me instead of taking anything the world offers. It might be shiny, awesome, attractive, and everything you desire, I'm better. Take me instead. Okay, so first movement, we're tracking well. Let's jump to movement number 2, which is going to take place in verses 15 and 16, what we're honing in on. We can't cover all of the movement. But what wisdom is going to do is try to sell you on her. Has anyone ever been in a job interview before or interviewed people to hire them? So in that moment, like if you're interviewing for a job, this is your chance to talk about impressive things, to like kind of brag on yourself. What you don't want to do is talk about things that don't really matter. Like, yeah, I was riding my bike the other day. Like no one cares. Like what you want to do is talk about all of your accomplishments so that you can impress and get them to hire you. Wisdom's making her case for you to hire her as her guide. This is her resume. So watch what she ends up leading with. You want to know how impressive I am? By me kings reign, and rulers decree what is just. By me princes rule, and nobles, all who govern justly. So what she does is she says, look, you take humanity, the highest level you can go in royalty, those leaders ruling of societies, I am essential for them. I can guide your life. They depend on me. Now, a scholar named Michael V. Fox ends up saying, not all kings rule with wisdom. The point here is that for good rulership, wisdom is essential. So she's boosting her resume. And then what she's going to do is point out how rulers, go back, Zach, sorry. How rulers decree things. And what would happen when a ruler decrees something is he would inscribe it, or carve out is the wording that's supposed to be referenced here, carving out into stone decrees. Why do rulers make decrees? Because there's a bunch of disorder around them that they got to lead. There's a bunch of injustice. So what wisdom is doing is carving into injustice and chaos order. Wisdom is carving order into chaos. Okay, now you can go, Zach. The other thing she's saying in this second movement is, I want you to take my fruit because it's better than anything else. The best of silver and gold, anything wealth has to offer, my fruit is better. All right, go to our summary so you can track with this. Part 2, you see her main 2 points. Let's read in part 3 in her final movement before her conclusion. If you want to amp up her resume, what can you go above ruling nations that she's essential for? How about creating the entire world? Look at this. Yahweh possessed me at the beginning of his work, the first of his acts of old. Ages ago, I was set up at the beginning, before the beginning of the earth. And she'll go on to describe this pre-creation state. And just picture, before anything orderly happened, the Bible gives us the scene of this watery, chaotic wasteland, just amidst that, it's a bunch of emptiness and nothingness that's described. So she describes the pre-creation state. I was there at the beginning. And then she'll go on to describe the creation of forming mountains, carving out boundaries, creating order in land and boundaries for the sea. She's just describing, hey, I was partnering with Yahweh in the creation of the universe, which includes you. How about that? Do you want me as your guide or not? You see her case? Now, you've heard Wisdom's 3 speeches, and overall, let me give you kind of a summary statement that I want you to think about. If Wisdom's ways, if she was a part of the way the universe was wired, if you decide to align yourself with her, you will align yourself with the grain and current of the universe, and you will reap the blessing of that. She's in the design. Of course you should listen to her, and it will lead to a lot of earthly blessing. Now pause. Is life all about making wise choices? Is that what you were put here for? Is it about making wise choices that lead you into living a good life with a nice family, and there's relatively decent order in that? Does the Bible put that forward as why you are here? No. But here's what's beautiful. If you thought that Wisdom's speech was awesome, just check out how the author is doing something even more to answer the question that I'm putting before you. Is life more than wise choices? Watch what he does with this literary design, okay? We walked through 3 movements. I'm going to show you how these movements are doing something even more than what they're like just calling you into earthly blessing. Watch how this is going to work. Look at part 3. Wisdom was there at the beginning. She helped carve order and create life and beauty. What is the author doing? He's using language that activates your mind to take you to another place in the Bible. Where's your mind going? At the beginning. Genesis 1 and 2. Let's read it together. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. Pre-creation state, disorderly, watery wasteland, abyss. And who is there? The Spirit of God hovering over the waters, about to bring order, about to carve order into chaos. Okay, so my mind in this movement has already imageries put me back into Genesis 1. Let's keep moving with these movements. So watch part 2. This idea of a king ruling and this idea of fruit. Oh, that's also why was I put here? Let us make man in our image. Zach, you can actually go to that slide. And God blessed them, and he said, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion. When God says, let us make man in our image, he's saying, I want them to express my rule and reign, have dominion over everything. They will be rulers partnering with me over creation. That's why you were made, okay? And so he uses this language of rulership. But also, going on, you can go back to the movement, this idea of fruit and yield is mentioned in Wisdom's speech. And even in Proverbs 3:18, wisdom is described as a tree of life. Again, where's your mind going? It's back to the garden. And what I love is watch how clear this becomes in this first movement. Where can you think of a place where a decision is being made in the presence of goodness and God's design, when God speaks and it was good and it was good and it was good and the whole thing is full of blessing and goodness and God's voice and his design? If you eat of this tree, life. You eat of this other tree, you will surely die. That's just my design. Why did I give you commands? to draw your attention to my design, because I want you to live in a life of flourishing. This is my design. I'm calling you into it. But in the same place of decision point and goodness, there's also this crooked, twisted voice going on in the garden. Do you see that? Let's read it. Genesis 3. But the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die. That seems to twist and counteract the true voice that they've been hearing in the garden, that Adam and Eve have heard. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Now watch this. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desired to make one wise. This is sounding a lot like Lady Folly. Attractive. Come on, follow your desires. Go after what looks good. Don't think about the consequences. Desired, and then she took. Zach, go back to our main overview. All of these things are activating. They're pulling you back into the garden, because in the garden is where you are represented, according to Proverbs 8, with the same decision that Adam and Eve had to make. You are sons and daughters of Adam and Eve further down the road, but you're presented with the same decision. Will you listen to the voice of Yahweh, or will you listen to another voice? Now, what are we saying here? My point to you is that there is a difference between obeying and following the grain of wisdom and getting earthly blessing, which you're made for earthly blessing and morality, but you were made for something so much more. You were made for garden life. Here's an illustration. If wisdom is the current, like a river flowing, you can dip your toe in it. Like, you can operate in its wisdom and design, and you'll experience good stuff. But that's not her ultimate destination. She doesn't just want you dipping your foot in the current and tasting of a couple good things that come along. She wants you fully immersed in her way, in her stream. And when you fully immerse yourself in her leadership and her ruling over you, where do you end up in her destination? In the garden, in the presence of God. You were made not for morality and good decisions. You were made for the presence of God. Do you see that? There's a story the other day. Something happened the other day. A story that came to my mind was Tay and I took Will to a park over by Sacred Heart. And we're just hanging out there with him. And there's this other dad and his two kids that end up coming. And so they're all playing together, our kids are, and me and this gentleman end up in a conversation about life and stuff. And he ends up describing that he's from Canada. Him and his wife were living in China, and this life event happened to where he ends up moving back to Ohio. And as he's sharing with me, he ends up describing it like this big life event happened. And then he shares, well, what the life event was when his daughter was born. She's growing up. But then all of a sudden, he ends up getting news that his father had died of this out-of-the-blue heart attack. And you could hear or just feel in his voice as tears started to kind of well up, as he described how distraught he was that his dad never met his daughter. And there were two tragedies going on as I listened to this. The first was just that is such a tragic thing, that his dad missed out on meeting in person his daughter. And then I thought about it a little more. And I'm like, wait a sec, was his dad put on this earth with the whole purpose of just getting to meet his granddaughter? Was that the culmination of this man's existence? Or was he made for something much more? He was made for the presence of God. He wasn't made to get the good things and stop at the gifts. All of the goodness of family and relationship and a granddaughter, all of those are good gifts, pointing you, screaming, keep going back all the way, follow the stream the whole way, all the way back to the giver. Because you were made for the presence of God. You were made for garden life. Do you see this? It's a tragedy If you end up finding wisdom as a mentor and you just treat her like your toes in the water and you never follow her fully to her destination. You with me? So I gotta fast forward. If you were to think about the idea of wisdom's voice calling out to you, a voice calling you into a certain way of life, does it really stop in the Old Testament? Or when you get to the New Testament, do you start to hear another voice calling? Watch how this is going to work. Now, I don't have it on the screen, so Zach, you can just go to like a blank slide or something. I want you to picture how Jesus gets introduced in the New Testament. Do you remember John's introduction in his gospel? How does it start? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Describes all things were made by him, and without him was not anything made. Do you see the really associated connection between the call of wisdom and Jesus at the beginning? So we hear already that Jesus is really associated with wisdom. And what are Jesus' credentials? If the earthly king says like, hey, listen, like, hear wisdom's voice, what does the heavenly Father say about this man named Jesus? What is his view of Jesus? If you were to think of what is Jesus' resume? Well, one, he was with God at the beginning, and he is the way in which all things were made. Okay, like that's pretty weighty. But what does the Father say about him? Not going to be on the screen. Do you remember Jesus' baptism? Jesus into the water, comes out of the water. Immediately the Spirit descends on the scene, rests on Jesus. The heavens open up, and a voice comes, and the voice says, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased." So I know what the Father says of Jesus, that he takes delight in Jesus. He's well pleased with him. What else does the Father say? Go to the Mount of Transfiguration. The same voice comes from heaven, and it says, "This is my beloved Son." Again, listen to him. So the fatherly king's telling you to listen to wisdom, and then the heavenly Father is screaming from the heavens, "Listen to my Son." And then you hear Jesus talk, and he ends up describing things like, hey, you want to get back to the Father? I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. You want to end up in Eden again? Come through me. Do you want life? I'm the door. A sheep come in through me and find pasture. They find garden life through me. And later in that same text in John 10, I've come so that you would have life, and so that you would have life to the full. He's describing garden life. Now, what is Jesus' destination? If wisdom has a destination she's pulling to, Jesus comes and he's screaming the same call, but in the fuller sense, he's calling you to the same destination wisdom wants you. What's the destination? It's less of a place and more of a person. The call of Jesus is a call to come into relationship and be with a person. Relationship with him will be garden life. Now. Also later, but right now. And specifically, I kind of want to move into what is Jesus' actual call for you. Watch how this works in Luke 9. And Jesus said to all, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself." If you want me, deny yourself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever would save his life would lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world if he loses and forfeits himself, if he loses his own soul? Even if you tried to swim in the current of wisdom, how long can you swim? How long can you align yourself by human behavior in the current of wisdom? Take Solomon. the epitome of human wisdom, the wisest man who ever lived, what happens to him? He sees. His desires pull him, and he takes. Exactly what Adam and Eve did. His heart is fickle, and his heart is led away from God. He fails. When Jesus shows up on the scene, he says, Solomon was great. The queen of the south came to see him, but someone greater than Solomon is here. And Jesus lives the life well-pleasing, always swimming in the current of wisdom. And he invites you into his way. But in order to live in the way of Jesus, he requires something of you. He says, you have to let go and live a life laid down in submission to me. You have to be a living sacrifice. Now, the way living sacrifices work, the way denial works, is not through partial submission. That's not it. If you want all of the person of Jesus, he requires all of you, which means denial of anything and every desire that gets in the way of him. Why? He loves you too much. If he just let you go after your desires, that's not for your good. He loves you too much to let you pursue your desires. And he knows that the best thing you can do is submit to a new rulership in your life, who's always walking in the way of wisdom. And submitting to the king does lead to blessing, mainly found in him. But I have to help you see the other side of the king's voice. How does the king's voice sound? What's the content of his speech? Yes, it's full of wisdom and life and blessing. It's garden life. But in the garden, even in our proverb, we end up reading, I don't think I have it on the screen, but at the back half of her speech, she talks about how wisdom was Yahweh's delight. She talks about how she delighted in the inhabited world and delighted in the children of man. In the picture in the garden, you see moments of laughter and joy. Now watch this. And when Jesus, when he's walking on this earth, he ends up having a woman brought to him. Do you remember this story? Possibly dragged by her hair, thrown at Jesus' feet, and says, we caught her. Even to the ones who'd fallen prey to Lady Folly's voice, just like this woman who committed adultery, we caught her. Doesn't the law say stone her? And Jesus, man, his voice. Well, let the one who's never sinned cast the first stone. The stones drop, 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 and they all walk away. It's just Jesus and the woman, and he turns to her and he says, where are your accusers? Then neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. You see, the voice of Jesus is not just truth, but it is a voice of mercy. It is a voice of forgiveness. And no matter if you've made decisions and went after desires that have cost you points of your life, there is no place you will ever come that the voice of mercy can't restore you and bring you back to the intimacy he wants with you, to the friendship, to the garden life he wants with you. And I think the Spirit has been doing a lot within our community, specifically our student community, and this idea of how the Father views us, how Jesus views us. And there's a cool story. I was talking with one of our young adults, and he's been walking through a really hard journey of a lot of spiritual warfare, a lot of psychological problems, physiological problems. And he's been walking through this journey. And he ends up describing to me how God has spoken to him and revealed something that he'd never found worth in understanding who he was. And yet, as he ends up looking at MRI images of brain scans in a 2D way, he ends up finding this modeling software that allows him to see in a 3D fashion his own brain. And through that, God shows him how intricately woven he is and how much he matters. And the voice of Yahweh sings over him, "You are a son in whom I'm well pleased, and I delight in you." A voice of mercy, a voice of delight. Who is this king singing over you? Listen to the words of Zephaniah. Band, I know that was your cue. You don't have to come up yet. I'll give you another cue. We're not there yet. Listen to the words of Zephaniah. If you want to hear, what does the Father say of me? What does Jesus say to the woman who failed to make the right decisions? But it doesn't matter, because Jesus did live the life that he offers to you to now become a son of his, a daughter of his, fully pleasing to him. And what does the voice of God sing over you? The Lord your God is in your midst, a mighty one who will save. He will rejoice over you with gladness, and he will quiet you with his love. He will exalt over you with loud singing. How do people end up feeling the love and the voice of this king? Well, first it starts when you decide to live in submission to the king and you surrender all of who you are to King Jesus and say, "I want your rulership over me." He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. Jim Elliot. Don't be a fool. Listen to wisdom's call all the way to the destination of Jesus, to Jesus' call. Give up what you can't keep. Stop trying to be God over your life. Let it go. And invite the new king to take rulership over you, which will mean a life of denying. And as you step into that in a life of surrender and say, "Jesus, become my king," what's going to happen in you is you will start walking fully in the way of wisdom through a new guide. Because when Jesus leaves, he says, "Look, it's to your advantage that I go." Because who's coming? The helper. The one at the very beginning who was carving order into chaos, who can move into your life and start carving order into chaos. The helper, the Holy Spirit. Jesus says when he comes, he will guide you. He'll be your mentor, your guide. He will guide you in all truth. He's going to tell you what I have to say. Life is about relationship with me. He's my voice. Listen to him. That's Paul's language in the New Testament. You can follow the desires of the flesh and you will reap corruption, or you can follow the Spirit's voice and you will reap life. Do you see this? So what does this practically look like? I kind of want to end with this. What does this practically look like? Well, when the king's sons and daughters start living in submission to the king, his love in radical and ordinary ways starts popping on the scene. Do you remember the young man who texted me? "I'm homeless. I need a place to stay." I ended up texting a couple of our students, and one of them was Caden, and I said, "Hey, let's radically love this boy. Let's show him the love of Jesus. Let's do this." And through conversations and where our desires, like, let's just bring Trent into our life. He'll just do life with us. And the Works is a family in our church, and they end up saying, "Yeah, we'll host him. He can live with us." And they provide a space for him, and he ends up being in conversations with us, a part of our community, and living what it is to be in the current of God's body. And what effect did that have on that young man who was in a toxic relationship with his family? Hatred, harboring, unforgiveness, both parties probably at wrong. Living in a toxic relationship with his family, homeless. Let me read you the text as he ends up going out to Arkansas. Something happened while he was in the community of God's people. He ends up hearing a different kind of way of life, a different voice. Here's the text on his bus ride to Memphis on his way to Arkansas. "I met this Venezuelan guy on the bus to Memphis. I'm still on the bus at this current moment. He barely spoke English, so we had to talk through my translator app. His name is Isaac. But we got to talk about a lot of things. We end up on the subject of God and Jesus. And Isaac reminded me that Jesus is about forgiveness, and that I should forgive the people from my past. And he says, he sent a text to his parents, and he says, I know I played a part in everything, but I want to say I forgive you guys for everything. And he goes on to say, but wow, this boy has tasted of the love of Jesus, and it changed him. And God is still after him. Trent's journey is still being formed. And Jesus desperately wants to be wisdom for him for the rest of his life. But more than that, he wants Trent in his presence so that he can delight and sing over him. And that is the voice for you, that God wants you in his presence so he can delight and sing over you. So I want to finish with this psalm, in Psalm 16. You'll see it on the screen. I say to Yahweh, you are my Lord. I have no good apart from you. Right there, the recognition that I am not going to be king of my life. I want Jesus, Yahweh, you're the king now. And I recognize that all other desires are no good. There's nothing good apart from you. So, I bless the Lord who gives me counsel. He's the one who's instructing my life now. I follow his leadership. Verse 8, I have set him always before me. He is close to me. Yahweh is at hand. Next verse. Therefore, my heart is glad, and my whole being rejoices. What the Spirit has been doing in our community is changing us from a place where we used to live in fear of man and what people will think, but he's bringing us into pastures of running in the rain and running in freedom, listening to the voice of God, delighting in his intimate ways and his intimate friendship, dancing to his voice that he sings over us. Because in his presence, you'll see in the next verse, in his paths, in his presence, listen to this. You make known to me the path of life. In your presence is where fullness of joy is, where delight is. And at your right hand are pleasures forevermore. And what Jesus has invited you into is a life laid down. Because the life laid down, the life of surrender, leads into the life of delight in both directions. If you want to live a life worth something, live a life moving the heart of God, making him sprout with joy the way that he sang over Jesus at his baptism. This is my beloved son. I'm so pleased by him. This is my daughter. I'm so pleased by her. That's what you were made for. That's garden life. Will you hear his voice? And will you surrender to it? Will you follow? Let me pray for us. Let me just give you space to think and respond to the voice, possibly speaking to you. The band can come up.